So this afternoon, we're delighted to welcome 6 wonderful presenters to this hybrid event to share their practice. Their presentations will show how ceramicists around the world are adapting their practice and developing new ways of working to become more sustainable. From low-energy kiln designs, new clay recipes, working with reclaimed waste materials, and new methods of reusing and reducing, and also considering these in relation to technologies that have existed across cultures for centuries. So without more ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, in fact our keynote speaker, Dr. Wendy Gazo, who is joining us online from the Netherlands. Wendy is an award-winning contemporary curator from the Global South. Her research interests include sustainability, decolonization, museum restitution, and healing. Please welcome Dr. Wendy Gazo.
Thank you, Jenny, for your warm welcome. Thank you, Professor Moira Vincentelli, for the invitation. It's wonderful to be with you. A couple of years ago, I attended the festival in person and have very fond memories of a very inspiring event. So, yeah, without further ado, let me share my current research with you. Today, my presentation is on sustainability in ceramics rather than sustainability and ceramics. And my question is, how do we move beyond advocacy? And as keynote, I have the opportunity to ask difficult questions about our field. And I believe that art has been instrumental in bringing about social and environmental changes for many years. Since the 60s, we see artists actively involved in the environmental movement, doing all sorts of interesting things, but primarily engaged in different forms of advocacy. I feel that we're in a time that we need to move beyond that. This is the content of my presentation. I'm going to give us a brief definition of sustainability after running through my bio so that you know who I am and where I'm coming from. I'll do that as quickly as possible. I'm mindful of time and that we've started quite late. Jenny's already mentioned some key strategies around reducing your environmental impact. And then I'm going to move forward with bioceramics and looking at the past, the present, and future before particularly honing in on some interesting current practices. So who am I? Yeah, a scholar originally born in South Africa, hence the terrible accent. Curator, my first big show was in Taiwan in 2014, the Taiwan Ceramics Biennale. I'm also an author, and among other publications is Scorched Earth, a 395-page tome on histories of Southern African potteries. More recently, I curated First Central Chinese Biennale in Jinzhou, Central China, and continue to work as a scholar. Recent publications or peer-reviewed journal articles include one on Samuel Makanyane, a South African Sotho artist, and also looking at sand pottery, which are First Nation people in Southern Africa who were victim to genocide. Not very positive, but it's about telling stories of people who've been written out of history, and that's really important to me. Ceramics tends to be written by scholars in the global north for the global north, and I sort of circle around telling alternative stories. At the moment, I work for the National Ceramics Museum in the Netherlands, Princesshof. Excuse me. And I'm currently curating an exhibition, a major exhibition, a retrospective of the Dutch-British artist Bouke de Vries, who is known internationally for his work recycling and upcycling ceramics from primarily China and Europe. Today, we are finalizing the installation of the exhibition, and yesterday that photo was taken. You may have seen it on social media. I presented Bouke with the first catalogue, or the first copy of the publication. So what is sustainability? Often it's just considered a shortcut for environmentalism. It's not. There are these three pillars: the environment, economy, and society, and they all overlap, and one, a sustainable society or sustainable world can't exist where these three pillars are not equally strong. And this leads me on to the question that, to varying and lesser degrees, is behind this presentation, as well as a lot of my thinking. And it's an adaptation of T.J. Demos's thoughts. And he's specifically talking about art, but I think one can apply this to ceramics and ask, how might ceramics grant dignity and aesthetic expression to the struggles for individual and collective well-being, social and economic justice, and multi-species flourishing? And here we see this more than human approach to this medium, and one that is often forgotten. I'm going to briefly just talk about ceramics sustainability at Princesshof. I was hired to, because of my interest in sustainability, and we are in the middle of a series of 3 exhibitions within the next year. A website with films and scholarly texts will appear on our website. All sustainability issues are embedded within our green team at the museum. It's also embedded within diversity initiatives and core museums functions, especially collections research and exhibition design. The design part is really important, and as a curator, I work really hard to think about these issues with our design team. We're also looking at development of a new visitor route for our permanent exhibition. Current alternative visitor routes, which are indicated by QR codes, include a gastronomical route as well as a colonial history route. So, what are these 3 exhibitions that we are working on? The first has happened. It was called Repaired, Recycled and Reactivated Ceramics. The second one, and this is not the definitive title, looks at the environmental impact of ceramics through the ages in the Netherlands, and it's co-curated by the most amazing team from Smogware, Iris de Kivith and Anne-Marie Pisquet. And the final exhibition, which will happen in 2027, looks at ceramics and communities, specifically at how ceramics can facilitate resilient and resistant communities. For the Sustainable Ceramics 1 exhibition, there's a small online PDF of the key works that are available, that were in that exhibition, and you can download that for free. Oftentimes people don't realize that this is a downloadable and it's free, so I'm just giving you a little hint there. Scroll down on the Sustainable Ceramic 1 page and you'll find that little document. One of the key works in the Sustainability 1 exhibition was by Sarah Howard. Her Conserving Ceramics from 2021 was her graduate project, and was and is a really essential work in terms of the field of ceramic history, in my opinion. And I was very grateful that Sarah allowed the museum to buy this edition, and it is now proudly a part of our permanent collection. The set of conserving ceramics uses the World Wildlife Foundation's classification scheme for endangered animals and applies this to raw materials commonly used in ceramic glazes and bodies. So, for example, we see the enlarged work in front of you, which is zinc, a critically endangered raw material, which has terrible consequences in many communities, mining communities, contributing to neurological impairments in South America and in many other places where it's mined. We've all forgotten the terrible consequences of extractive mining, and we tend to easily overlook that mines have all migrated to the global south, where labor legislation is poor and modern slavery, namely the use of children, is a common occurrence in many nations, and mines for materials associated with the ceramic practice, especially cobalt, where there's a large body of literature and a number of non-profit organizations working to assist children and families involved in abusive labor practices in cobalt mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example. Okay. How do you, and I'm assuming my audience is mostly ceramic artists, reduce your environmental impact? This is all fairly common knowledge. It's also highlighted in Julia Matluke's fabulous book. I've left out a couple, but I'm sure you're very familiar with them. The ones that I've left out are to do with glazing. And in my presentation today, I'm going to be rather bold, and I'm going to show you precisely one fired and glazed ceramic object. And now you've seen it, the work by Sarah Howard. So my aim today is to talk about what I'm going to term bioceramics. And I'm not using the term in its traditional sense. I'm using it as a placeholder for a type of ceramics, low fired and no fired ceramics, that is sealed with plant-based resins and is or is polymerized. The term bioceramics is currently primarily used by the medical industry to refer to dental and the ceramics that is used in dental and bone implants. So my use of it is really appropriating it for an art and a craft audience and in a far lower tech situation. So yes, here we go. This is my potted timeline of what I'm terming bioceramics. And this is my most recent research that I've been working on since for a while, but primarily started and worked intensely on this in the United States, where I was a visiting professor last year. We're all very familiar with the Venus of Dolny Vestovici, a 36,000-year-old sculpture, a fertility figurine, we believe, that is found alongside different animal sculptures in the Czech Republic. This clay body was mixed with bone, ground bone, a sort of a calcinate mixture, and burnished. Other clay sculptures and unfired artworks litter history. One can look in France where from 13,000 before the current era, we see the clay sculptures of this fantastic clay cow and bison in the Ariège region. And from 2050 to 1500 before the Common Era, we see different sculptures and bracelets, amphora, etc., being produced in China and being sealed with birch bark tar. One sees throughout history the use of a number of different resins, tars, they're also called pitches, made with a variety of coniferous, or made from a variety of coniferous trees and plants. We also see products such as shellac, which is an animal or insect-based resin used primarily on wood in Asia. There's numbers, a huge number of bioresins that have been used throughout the ages to seal and vitrify objects for eating purposes and for bodily purposes. Many people who've traveled to India will be aware of the cool tars. They've got many different names in different parts of India, but from 7000 BC, we start seeing these hand-molded cups in the Pakistan region. It then moves down the Indus Valley into India, and these cups are still used, disposable, unfired or super low fired. They are literally disposed of after a couple of uses. They were reintroduced in 2019 by the Central Indian Railway System as an alternative to single-use plastic bottles. Unfortunately, that was stopped. Just going back, and moving close to home being for me at the moment Europe, Central Europe, looking at the Minoans. The Minoans used beeswax and resin to seal their cooking pots. Throughout North America, from the 12th or 13th century, we see pine resin sealed historic pottery right throughout the United States, from New York right down through the Mississippi Basin and going further south. And this is still this is still being practiced in some small rural communities. Within Spain, we see a lot of pine pitch being used to seal pottery, specifically pottery associated with the export of food. And closer to my original home, I guess, and possibly where this research started, was looking at sand potters and clay potters who developed these fantastic indigenous knowledge systems using springbok blood and doornboom resin. And a doornboom is a thorn tree. It's an acacia variety. And these were used the resin from this doornboom was used to seal unfired vessels. And these vessels lasted extensively and are still found within archaeological contexts. The vessel on your right is a sand vessel and is believed to be finished in this manner. Within extreme communities living in climatic extreme zones, such as the San in desert zones and the Thule and other Arctic communities where there's less clay and specifically less trees to use for firing, one sees the use of marine mammal fat whale and seal fat, as well as blood being used to seal vessels. Obviously, within our contemporary society, there's a real fear of salmonella, and one is far more reticent to, or it would make a lot of people uncomfortable to eat or drink out of a unfired vessel sealed with mammal fat and blood. However, the use of these, sustained use of these with other foodstuffs seals them and makes them very safe. And certainly these types of communities knew how to use these vessels, cooking pots and bowls in safe ways. One also tends to forget that a lot of the Chinese earthenware from the Tang Dynasty and even earlier was actually not glazed. A lot of it is simply earthenware that has been decorated with pigments. Most of those pigments have been lost over the course of time, leaving us with these beautiful earthenware figurines. But that was not the case, and they were very frequently unglazed. And these are a really fascinating genre of vessel that I discovered. The tonala or bucaro comes from Mexico and it became a phenomenon in Europe in the 17th century and was extensively exported to Italy, Spain, and Central Europe. The clay from the town of origin was known for its sweetness and medicinal qualities, and these were sold for exorbitant amounts. And yes, quite simply burnished earthenware that has existed and is still found in this fantastic condition to this day. And these type of objects, and the next one that I want to show you, this pair of 18th century figures, they're called nodding heads figures because they actually literally do have little heads that nod, are similarly made of painted clay. They are unfired. They have been exported. They were extremely popular. These two were exported to Europe for 2 centuries and are found in great quantities in museum collections across Europe, the United Kingdom, United States, and they have survived for 300 years without any. They've been carefully looked after. And yeah, so my question is, do we really, does one really need to fire? And moving on from that, I kind of want to cycle back to the question of ceramics and community. This is a photo, the larger photo was taken in February 23. It's the largest gathering of a gong ensemble and dance group in Tabuk City, Kalinga in the Philippines. The Kalinga are known for their pottery using a type of resin which is harvested from a pine variety. It's applied hot to pottery. But unfortunately, due to climatic change and also due to over-harvesting of this resin, it's becoming a scarcer resource. And there's a lot of complexities around this material at the moment. Moving on, I just wanted to talk briefly about some current artistic and industrial research into this material that I'm terming bioceramics. And this term is really very elastic, and I'm using it very much in inverted commas. Nicole Cerescu, whose work appeared on the Sustainable Ceramics 1 exhibition, is a Greek artist based in London. She's produced earthenware ceramics that is sintered using a technique called biomineralization, in which she uses a specific type of bacteria and crushed ceramics. And during this process, the crushed ceramic mass is placed in a mold in a liquid suspension. The bacteria, which live for a couple of days, essentially occupy the space between the earthenware grinds, or it's like sand, I guess, and essentially create a coral-like substance, a ceramic that is a form of ceramics. And I think this is really exciting, and I continue to work with Nicole, looking at how we can try and develop this further. Another designer that I'm working with, and this design duo will be part of Sustainability 2, and I'm not going to say anything more about that exhibition, which is opening in November, but do welcome you. It's going to be a really, really exciting show, and we've got co-curators, as I mentioned, from Lab Air in the Netherlands, who've been working on this for over 2 years very intensely, and are doing really fantastic work. So Stichting Fabrikaat started with a project called Coffee to Throw, making disposable coffee cups, rather like in India. However, they needed to seal them, and initially spoke to neighbors and got beeswax and started sealing it in beeswax, but this obviously has a limited life, and they then have started a very exciting research project looking at different biosealants, and rather than using regular coatings, they are looking at chemical reactions that occur with maltic and coffee with heat. So self-sealing vessels, essentially. Another fairly well-known company that's been around is Createra in Israel. They've developed these fantastic tiles, which are heated to below 100 degrees for 10 minutes. They are tested for strength, for permeability, and have fantastic results. I'm happy to discuss briefly this in the question session or any others, but I'm aware of time, and I want to finish up. This is a local Dutch product called Carelock. It's also a bio-based material using local waste streams. It is now it's essentially a gable cladding, and contains clay and fibrous materials, probably potato starch, manganese, which is also a major local waste stream, and is sealed with a biosealant. There are lots of biosealants available on the market, but theirs is specific. Theirs and a lot of the most interesting research is looking at plant-based sealants at the moment. So, future scenarios. How do we deal with this world we live in with scarce resources and competing interests, climate change that is accelerating at a pace that we could never imagine? We can say this is not our problem. As artists, we create a very small and limited impact. We can do the ostrich and put our heads in the sand and say it's not us, not us. I don't advocate for that. I think it's irresponsible, and I believe in leading by example. I'm also a mum and want to set that example for my children. A second scenario is to introduce more environmentally mindful practices. And we've been seeing that within the sustainable ceramics community over the last years. A third option, and one that is more radical and perhaps one that's closer to my heart, is really a radical overhaul of ceramic history. And what I've hoped that what I've presented today is this beginning of an overhaul of ceramic history to broaden what we consider ceramics and to embrace non-glazed and unfired ceramics. I think this needs to extend into pedagogy and how we teach ceramics specifically within educational context, because once somebody's gone down, has spent their 100,000 hours learning how to glaze and invested in building a practice using these tools and technologies, it gets very difficult to go back and to relearn and reconfigure. So yeah, I think this is an education question for the future generation. My colleague Vanessa Buckhuizen te Hoogt is looking at making and looking at the instruction of making within art academies. And she's come up with this lovely diagram and slide about making. And she says making is an experiential and reflective process situated in a time and place in which materials and makers interact. And she's determined, she's looked at these studio spaces and came up with these concentric, well, this model, developed this model with these two concentric rings of the sort of broader exterior factors determining education and these inner ones. And their environmental is clear, and environmental obviously, you know, meaning the broad, not meaning geographic, but really meaning meaning socially engaged and responsive to our environment. As you'll see, there are two blanks in this table, and Vanessa realizes the importance of local dynamics, and each classroom environment has its own challenges and its own unique composition. So, for example, within a ceramics community, often there is a gender issue. Often we have a predomination of women students. So perhaps a gender or age could be one of those factors inserted in the empty boxes. But yes, I'd like to really conclude with this idea of thinking about how do we educate around making, and how do we embed environmental concerns as fundamental in re-understanding our practice as a ceramics community. And finally, I'm going to end with a quote from Gandhi, who says, be the change that you wish to see in the world. And I think one needs to be brave and take radical steps in these radical times. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and I look forward to discussing some of these points with my colleagues at the end of the session. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Wendy. Yeah, so that was a wonderful, thought-provoking and really interesting overview of some of the history of the use of natural materials in ceramics, and really nice to have that positive feel to it and the positive way forward for us all. So yeah, Wendy will stay with us through the whole call, and we'll be here at the end to answer questions and to discuss issues with our other panelists. But we're going to move straight on to the next presentation, which is a recorded presentation from Victor Pedrosa. Victor is a ceramicist and founder of Rescued Clay in London, which repurposes discarded clay from construction sites to create art and promote sustainability.
Hi, I'm Victor, one of the co-founders of Rescued Clay, and today I want to challenge how we think about materials in ceramics. We're here to discuss rethinking industrial waste and transforming it into something valuable for us in terms of ceramic resources. In particular, we are trying to rethink how we use the waste from the construction industry to help us as a raw ceramic material. In the UK alone, the construction industry sends about 20 million tons of soil waste to landfill every single year. And only about 6.5% of that gets recycled, some of it as clay. Just to have an idea, just one development in London, very close to our studio, generated about 1.3 million tons of clay waste. We got about 16 tons of that clay, so there is still a massive amount of clay that's going directly to waste. This is, of course, an environmental problem, but also a massive missed opportunity for our industry in ceramics. This is where the concept of urban mining comes in. Instead of extracting new materials, virgin materials from these distant places coming from all over the world to the UK or into our studios, we are thinking about reusing the clay that is already around us. Basically, anywhere in London, if you start digging, you will find clay. And that's true for a big portion of the UK as well. And with this urban mining, we end up tackling two problems at once. We are trying to reduce the waste that's generated by the construction industry, and at the same time, we are reducing the carbon footprint of our ceramic industry. And this is exactly what we are trying to do at Rescued Clay. Rescued Clay has three main branches. The first one is a clay factory. This is where we get clay from construction sites. We bring it to our studio, we process it, and we transform it into clay that is workable for different applications. Then we have the second branch, the ceramic studio. This is where we engage with the communities. That's how people that is outside of our industry, or people also in the ceramic industry, can start to test this clay and to experiment with this clay and experience the clay and really think about and just looking at it and thinking this would be waste, but we are now using it to transform into something beautiful. And the third branch of Rescued Clay is a research and design lab. This is where we try to push the boundaries of what's possible with this urban sourced material. So we are trying to mix it with other forms of waste in the industry, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a second. Our methodology for cleaning this clay is not too different from how most of you would be familiar when you are recycling the clay from your studio. There is, though, a massive difference that we have to always sieve the clay with a very fine sieve, and this becomes a big problem when we try to scale the amount of clay that we are trying to rescue from these construction sites. But in general, what we are doing is we are drying, crushing, sieving, mixing the clay with water, mixing the clay with other materials, and then transforming it into workable clay. We have used this clay for hand building, for wheel throwing, and there will be challenges with this clay, especially when it comes to warping and predictability of the final piece. But that's where our research and design lab comes in. We are trying to mix this clay with other materials. Some of it is just grog that would make it much more workable and would make it the final result a lot more predictable. London clay is known for being very malleable. It's very workable. It's nice to work with. But as ceramicists, it might present a challenge, especially if you are a production porter. It might present a challenge when it comes to the final piece being very predictable, being very uniform, and that's why you'd have to mix with some other materials to make it a bit more predictable. We have done lots of tests. We've done tests at different temperatures. We know exactly how this clay will behave at each temperature that we want it to, and all of these is available for anyone that wants to work with this clay. So we don't want people to be getting this clay and having to do all of this work again. Part of our ethos is to make it easier and easier for people to work with this clay. And unlike most earthenware clays, London clay can achieve near zero water absorption rate, and this is due to the nature of this clay that we are getting, at least from this construction site. We are still to test these at different sites in London, but we still have a lot of clay in our studio, and we know that we can get very close to zero water absorption rate, which then makes this clay suitable for functional pottery and food safe applications. Our research and design lab goes beyond ceramics. We are also trying to use this clay as a binding material, both in terms of connecting communities, but also in our research and design experiments. We are also using it as a binding material for different forms of waste that we have around us. Rescued clay is located in an industrial estate, and there are lots and lots of industries around us that generate waste that for us could be used as raw material. So we have been mixing it with coffee grounds, with straw, with sand, with black sand that comes from the film industry. There is a lot of waste from the film industry that we are using in our facility to create new applications for this material. We are also exploring unfired applications for construction and design, testing some clay with different additives, trying to use most of the waste that we have around us and returning it into a new form. So for example, we are looking into unfired furniture or plastering clay using basically waste from different industries. But this is our current reality. Right now, we do everything by hand. We rely a lot on volunteers that come to our studio. They help us a lot with processing this clay. We wouldn't have been able to process all the clay that we've done so far without the help of volunteers. And doing everything by hand was good so far, has been good so far for us to learn exactly how to work with this clay. We know exactly what are the bottlenecks to scale the processing that we have right now, but we are limited on what we can do right now in our facility. So right now we have 14 tons of unprocessed clay that are there waiting for us to process it. And this volume represents both our immediate challenge, but also a scaling opportunity for us to expand and bring this clay to more people. And to realize this potential, we need collaboration and we need innovation. We know exactly how we would get from 50 kilograms a week that we are processing right now to 500 kilograms a week that we could process if we had the right equipment in our space. So we are currently seeking funding and support, but right now we do have a lot of unprocessed clay, and we offer that for free for anyone that wants to come and get your clay. You can come with your bucket, with your car, with your van, and get basically as much clay as you'd like to, but that's unprocessed clay. Our goal is at some point to process enough clay that would also offer clay at cost for people so that more people can use this clay instead of getting clay from all over the world being transported to your studio. And this brings me to our invitation to this community and to everyone that you know. Please do come talk to us if you are interested in working with urban clay and urban materials. We do want to engage with different communities, and we have all of this research available. If anyone wants to work with this clay, we don't want this to be a barrier for you. You can start from where we are right now and not from scratch. And as I mentioned, this clay has a lot of challenges, but also a lot of potential. We do know how the clay behaves, and we know how to change the clay if you want it for a specific application. So if anyone is interested to learn a bit more about rescued clay, you can go to our website. We list a lot of what I just mentioned on our website. You can also contact us if you want to come and visit our space, or if you want to get some of the clay. And we also have all of the research that we've done so far on on firing temperatures, water absorption, shrinkage, color palette with this clay. We have all of that already available, and everything that we are doing by mixing the clay with other materials we'll be making available as we go. We are updating our website to make sure that everything is easily accessible there. But for now, we have these two places, one with our website with everything a bit more polished, and this raw research you can find on this other website that's on the screen now. With that, I would like to thank everyone, and I'm open for questions.
I'd really like to thank him, because I think that's a wonderful project that he's doing in London, and that's a great invitation to all of you to visit him and go and collect some clay. I think we'll now move on before. So the next speaker is Yulia. Yulia Matluke is from Ukraine. She's a ceramicist and environmentalist.
Need to change the screen settings here.
So I think a lot of you are probably familiar with Yulia and her work and her book, and perhaps follow her online. So she has a special interest in how ceramic art can assist in sustainable development.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me and for this invitation. I will take it on from my colleagues and focus more on the carbon footprint of studio ceramics, and also expand the realm of sustainability to also include not only environment, but the social aspect and the war relief into the artist world. So my name is Yulia, and I'm a self-taught potter. I'm not a real artist. I have been converted to ceramics about 10 years ago, after a background in environmental science, ecology, and working for environmental NGOs. Now I have a studio I operate under the name of Here and Now Pottery. I also do quite a bit of research, and I have published a book about sustainability in ceramics. I also live and work in Ukraine in a town called Irpin, which is quite near Kiev. And the main topics, the main kind of pain of my practice is ceramics or for the Anthropocene, for this new era of climate change and environmental degradation. And because I'm from Ukraine, and because of the full-scale invasion into my country from the Russian Federation, war has been also central to my practice, and I will talk about it as well today. So the main tension that I'm wrestling with in my practice is essentially, how do we keep creating ceramics or anything in the face of these global challenges like climate change and the rise of authoritarianism and war, essentially? Like, sometimes I ask myself, does it even make sense to keep this privileged existence of creativity in this phase of tragedy in a world that sometimes seems to be crumbling? And if it does make sense, what does it mean for the practice? Like, if the world is changing so rapidly, do potters and pottery also have to change? And if yes, in which ways? I ask these questions myself very often. I think about them, and I like to talk about them with my colleagues like you today. So to try and partially answer this question, I took on a research of life cycle assessment of studio pottery to calculate the carbon footprint, the amount of carbon dioxide that is being emitted into the atmosphere when I or any potter produce ceramics. Here is one of the results. this is a diagram, the pie chart for the very standard ceramic item, which is a handmade mug. So this is what I call the average mug model. It is just a normal wheel-thrown stoneware mug fired in an electric kiln. And we can see that during its production, it emits up to 2 kilograms of CO2 into the atmosphere. Is it much, 2 kilograms? Is it little? Well, it's about the carbon footprint of a beef steak. So kind of not too much, but essential, especially if we compare to other types of arts and crafts like poetry or painting. Ceramic contributes more. And what is the most important outcome of my research is that we can see different sources of this carbon footprint. So you can see that about 3/4 of that comes from firing. Comes from firing electric kiln using electricity. It would also be about the same with gas firing or wood firing. So this is like what we call the hot spot, the most contributing stage of the process. And other contributors are plastic packaging, when we package our items, fruit production for glaze, clay mining, and transport of materials to get it to our studio. So we didn't stop here, the research, because then I wanted to compare different ways or different technologies in making mugs, essentially. So you can see the average mug there in the middle with 2 kilograms of CO2. But if you go to the left side, you can see what I call the dirty mug. And the dirty mug is essentially just a normal stoneware mug, but the difference is it was made with imported clay, so taken from overseas. It was glazed with a glaze colored with cobalt oxide, and it was decorated with the gold luster, and it underwent 3 firing because of that. And you can see how it changed the footprint quite significantly 3 times. But that's not only the bad news, because you can see on your right the eco mug. And the eco mug is again just a normal mug, but it was made with a local wild clay. It was decorated with a clay slip instead of glaze, and it was fired only once in a single firing routine. And you can see how essentially it really minimized. It cuts the footprint pretty significantly. So knowing all that, now having the numbers, now having the benchmark of what to compare to, I started to experiment in my studio with the ways to really cut that CO2. And I spoke to many potters across the world who are also concerned about their environmental footprints. And all in all, I came up with the priority list of the top steps that an environmentally minded potter may take in their practice to make sure that their practice is environmentally sustainable. And the number 1 priority here would be low carbon firing, because as we remember, 2/4 of that impact comes from firing, right? So how do we do that? We could lower our cone. So for example, not fire to cone 10 and instead use cone 6 or even lower and earthenware. We could upgrade and maintain our kilns so that they fire efficiently, they use less fuel or electricity. We could adopt raw glazing and single firing because it essentially uses up to 2 times less energy. And we could switch to renewable energy providers in areas when this is available. So if you remember one thing from my speech, it would be focus on firing and try to use less energy or fuel for that. Next steps would be sustainable suppliers, like using local clay, and it was already touched in the previous presentation by Victor, and also tracing the materials, like making sure that the minerals we are buying are not coming from companies and places that are complicit in the violation of ethical or human rights or environmental laws. Next would be minimizing and managing our waste, right? So like recycling clay, obviously, recycling glaze, recycling ceramic shards, and using byproducts from other industries, like something that Sarah Howard is doing. But not only that, a very important part of that is moving beyond our studios. and using our craft for advocacy, for awareness, for gathering donations, and for developing technical solutions for some of the environmental problems. So having done that prioritization and having interviewed lots of ceramicists and researchers around the globe, I realized there wasn't one source of information that I could read and had all this available. That's why I decided to publish a book. It's called Potter Saves the World, Learn to Make Sustainable Ceramics and Help Protect the Earth. Kim Sweet, who is a volunteer at this festival, has been very helpful as an editor of this book. Thank you very much. It is available online in case you're interested. So now I will move a little bit and talk, I will show you just a few examples of my works that are based on this understanding and these numbers. So this series is called I Will Sprout with Flowers, and it talks about the war in Ukraine. It is a memorial, a remembrance, a dedication to civilians who were murdered in my town of Irpin and the neighboring town of Bucha by the Russian army during their invasion. So basically, these are the busts made of unfired clay. They are filled with soil and with flower seeds, and I placed them all over the town, and they would degrade under the weather. So eventually clay would, dissolve and go back to the soil, and the flowers will sprout out of there. And it was a way for me to, I guess, process loss and trauma, but also celebrate the powers of life, probably. Another project called Emotional Labor. It is fired functional ceramics. These are the mugs and these are the sculptures where I use broken traditional Ukrainian ceramics and kind of give it a new life through incrustation of these pieces into new ceramics. And it's about how much emotional labor and efforts it takes to live through the war, but also how much efforts it would need to rebuild a society and a country and an infrastructure after the war is over. This series called Balancing Beasts, and the central piece, the Goosebumps, I made it at my recent ArtsLink International residency at the University of Montana in the United States, and it was presented at the NCCA at a show called Trade and Lightly. It was curated by Lisa Orr. Lisa is with us at the festival. You can meet her, she's amazing. So basically the central piece is about the Kakhovka Dam disaster. So a couple of years ago, Russian army blown up a huge dam in Ukraine across the Dnieper River, and essentially just flooded everything downstreams. It's a tragedy. It is. But what happened next is that the riverbed, which used to be the bottom of the water reservoir, started to grow really thick, really dense, really fast growing forest. It is now like the fastest growing forest in Europe. It's just massive. It's already like 5 or 6 meters tall in a couple of years, and it essentially gives me goosebumps. And the last thing that I'm going to show is my newest series called the Blackout Ceramics, and it refers back to what Wendy was saying about the bioceramics and unfired ceramics. So essentially, because of the war in Ukraine, we often don't have electricity. And when you don't have electricity, it's sad, and also you cannot fire anything. Because of that, and also knowing how much firing contributes to the carbon footprint of ceramic production, I was looking for ways to keep creating something without the need for firing. So this biocomposite is a mix of clay, paper pulp, and gluing agents like starch and CMC. So everything is biodegradable, everything is natural, and it hardens on air, it polymerizes, and it creates quite sturdy, kind of semi-functional pieces. I'm going to do a demonstration, 2 demonstrations actually, with this mix in the upcoming days, in case you're interested. So that's all from me. And just to sum up, what I wanted to say is that carbon footprint of studio ceramics is quite essential. It can be lowered down quite a bit with physical and practically available steps like single firing. And there are many ways to use our craft as a solution or partial solution to climate change and war and rapidly changing world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was a really incredible talk, and thank you so much for sharing with us your research and also the work that you've been carrying out in a war zone. So that's something for us all to kind of, to inspire us all that you can do such wonderful work and in a positive way. So we're now going to move on to, and actually it links really nicely to the next speaker, so what you said about carbon footprint and our work, the biggest part of our carbon footprint will be in the firing. So Jodie Crook-Giles will be as our next speaker. She also works on climate change programs and recently completed a Churchill Fellowship researching electric pottery kilns and firing practices. So please welcome Jodie.
Perfect. Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, Julia and Wendy and Victor as well. It's really great to follow on from that. Last year, I was fortunate enough to receive a Churchill Fellowship, and my name is Jodie Crook-Giles. I am a potter. I make tableware, so I'm very interested in making, useful products that people use in their home every day. But in my day job, I run a climate change fund for the energy system in the UK, and it's the biggest climate change fund in the country. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about innovation and our energy system and how we can reduce climate change in our, using our energy system in a more effective way. And I also spend a lot of time thinking about that in my own practice and in a community studio where I learned to pot about 10 years ago when I was an apprentice. So my primary question was, how can potters reduce impact on climate change? And my report is available online. There's so much information in there. So do download it if you want to get any more detail on anything I'm going to talk about. We've talked a bit about how broad sustainability is already on this panel, but that point that Julia's made about 75% of the emissions, according to Julia's research, coming from the firing is a fundamental facet of why I've chosen to focus on that element of firing. It's very personal to me, and I know a lot of potters in the UK use electric kilns, and if we are interested in really thinking about how we can lower our own carbon emissions and impact from what we are doing, then we really, really need to focus in on the bits that are most impactful. And a lot of the decisions we make about sustainability are very, very intuitive. We don't have a lot of scientific evidence to make better, impactful choices if that is our aim. So, yeah, as I say, I'm a potter. I also spend all of my day job working on climate change, and I wanted to do this research primarily because I wanted to start a conversation, a really honest and informed conversation about the impact of making pottery in the studio setting. And so March and April last year, I got to travel to America and Japan and visit potters and kiln manufacturers across those two countries. I did a lot of work interviewing people in the UK and in Europe as well, and I interviewed Julia and Wendy. So I learned a huge amount during that time. I did 40 semi-structured interviews, a massive literature review, and then some independent analysis of international energy systems. So I'll talk you through some of that. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. The bit that I really wanted to focus on is that what can we do in our own studio? So there's lots that Victor talked about you can think about in terms of sourcing, and Sarah Howard thinks about in terms of sourcing materials. There's lots you can think about once the pot leaves your studio and what happens to it next, and how does that impact the full life cycle impact of your making. But I wanted to focus really on what we can do in our own studio. And from the literature review that I conducted and then kind of analysed all of the work that people had done on this, it was around 80%. So 75 to 80% of the impact of making pots is from that firing in electric kiln scenarios. And the average studio ceramic mug has a carbon footprint of between 800 grams and 1,700 grams of CO2. As a kind of general sweeping statement, electric firing is less impactful on climate change, and I'm going to drill into that a little bit more when I talk about my kind of country analysis of why that is. I work in innovation, and so I visited lots of manufacturers of kilns, and I found that mostly they weren't innovating enough. You know, most kiln manufacturers just are not thinking about this issue. We need a lot more data if we're going to establish statistically significant baseline of evidence and really understand how adapting what we're doing and varying our process is having the impact we want. So I came up with 14 practical actions. I'm going to talk you through a few of those. But before I do that, I'm going to give you some kind of general reflections on the trip that I went on and the people I met and talked to. The guy in the middle at the top there is David Peters. He's from the Archie Bray. He's the clay business director, and he is working very much on what Victor was talking about, which is how do we make the best clay we possibly can? Because if we are using great materials, we have less wastage. He was hugely inspirational to me. Reflections from that trip around America, you know, they have modern, very well insulated studios, kiln rooms full of the most extraordinary kilns I've seen, like so many kilns and so many scuts and so many blows. The blow kilns were really interesting because they were like, we're a sustainable university because we've got a blow kiln, and then they were flying in people to fix those from Europe. So the flight impact was outweighing any carbon impact you might get from that. And it's a very consumer-driven pottery world. You know, I started off my trip at MCCA. I met Lisa Orr, who you can all go and see. She was amazing. But yeah, I started off my trip there, and about half of that conference, it's a conference just like this, but in America, and half of it was people trying to sell you things. So I found that just really like a really interesting way of having a pottery culture. I went to meet Jim Scott and talk to him about why they have so many bungholes in their kiln. It's like having a house with single glazed windows. Lisa is here, go and talk to her, an incredible potter, thinking about how we can use J-draft systems and recycle bits of our kilns. In Japan, I found a pottery industry in massive decline. It's been in recession for my entire life. I'm 42. And they really focus on gas and wood firing. They all have electric kilns and they bisque fire in the electric kilns, but then they're kind of hidden around the back, and most of the firing that you see is the wood firing. And you know, when I went to Japan, I work in the innovation space. I work with Hitachi and Toshiba and all of the amazing companies we have, like Sony, who are the most innovative tech companies, some of the most innovative tech companies in the world. And I sort of thought there would be an intersection between that and the ceramics culture, and there was none of that at all. The pottery tradition there is around pride in that long-term ceramic history, and it's much more important to them to maintain that tradition than think about what the impact of making their pots is. When I asked them about were they concerned about sustainability or what did they think about climate change, it was kind of a non-question. They didn't actually know how to respond because they're not talking about it. And so they've got other priorities. You know, they're struggling with a lack of labour and resource, and where do we get fuel from on a tiny island? So it was that was a really interesting experience, and I met some really incredible people there. Working in really extraordinary situations. One thing I really noticed was the buildings are very, very poorly insulated. So I'm going to move on to carbon intensity by country. Loads of people, whilst I was doing this research, asked me, is it better to fire wood or electric? And it totally depends on so many factors. But the things to think about if you're firing wood are that it has to be harvested and transported, and that takes fuel and emits carbon. The wood burnt has to be replaced, and if you're replacing with deciduous trees, that can take up to 50 years, depending on species. There's no agreement on the carbon accounting for wood, and I found 4 different metrics for that. So they're all in my report, and that's gone into in a lot of detail in the report. So do have a look at that if you're interested in that question. But to make this a little bit easier for us to really visualize, this bit of work is about the average emissions factors from electricity consumption globally. So if we think about our electricity systems by country, the places in the world where we're generating electricity from coal still, so Ukraine is a classic example of this, and Montana and the Central American belt where I was, there's a lot of coal being burned to make electricity. In the UK, we've phased that out. In Scandinavia, they've pretty much gone mostly renewables already. Today in the UK, 50% of our electricity came from wind power, 25% came from solar, and only 10% came from burning gas, and that's where most of our emissions and carbon intensity come from. So in the UK, we will be net zero carbon on our electricity system by 2030, and that basically means that if you're making that choice between wood and electric firing, that choice of electric firing, if you're interested in the carbon impact of what you're doing, is the more effective choice. When we fire really matters, that sun and wind is fundamental. So do have a think about that, and also have a look at your renewable energy tariff. There's lots of fake renewable energy tariffs out there. Kiln manufacturers, I've said this before, just not innovating enough. Roda and Blau were the exceptions here. I interviewed Benjamin Roda. They've developed a smart controller for their kilns, and that's super important because they're gathering all our data now, and that's proprietary. So we can't access that as potters collectively to work out how we could do things better, but they're using that data and they're working with the university to work out how we can effectively build a net zero kiln. Shout out to Tim Thornton here. He's got a whole section which I didn't even edit in my report, which is really interesting, thinking about how we could be innovating using our kilns in completely different ways. So really, really interesting thinking. There's a whole geeky section on materials in the report. This is just some photos exploring that. The 14 practical actions, if you take nothing away from this, the first thing we need to do as potters is be discerning. I teach ceramics, and the first thing I say to all my students is, please don't fire bad pots. They are going to stay on the planet for thousands of years. And really, I think if we want to really embed this practice and be responsible with the materials we're using, we have a responsibility to become masters of our crafts to justify the use of the materials. And I don't say that lightly at all. That editing process when you're making is fundamental. I'm a thrower, I'm a tableware maker. I threw for about 2 years and barely fired anything before I fired stuff because I wanted it to be really, really good. And when I teach now, I really think that that's a fundamental thing that we should be teaching the next generation of potters. I've talked about firing when it's sunny and windy. That's a really, really important factor for us here in the UK. And, Yulia has talked about this a little bit in terms of politics, but talking about climate change with your friends and family and customers and students is really fundamental. I've worked in energy and climate change for 20 years, and it feels like a real uphill struggle to get stuff done because it's super, super, super political. But we have the ability to have conversations with each other that can really fundamentally change the way we do things and change how we think about things. And so, my top 3 picks from this list of 14 are: be discerning, don't fire bad pots, fire when it's sunny and windy, and talk about climate change with your friends and family. And most importantly, this is a guilt-laden subject, right? Lots of people feel super, super guilty about our impact. We have a tiny impact as creatives and makers, but the most important thing is we need to have fun with what we're doing. Making pots, for me, it connects us with each other. It's about our environment. It gives us an opportunity to play and learn and experience great joy. And that's all fundamental to our human experience. And that's something that's really, really important to me as part of this. This is not about guilt. This is about having fun and having conversations with each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jodie. That was wonderful. It's really great of you to share your research and all the numbers with us and give us 3 top tips on how to move forward. I like a positive bit of energy. So that's great. And so now we're going to move on to carrying on the theme of kilns and firing, to Jean. And Jean Sampson, a ceramicist and kiln builder, has just quite recently, built a Jirel 3E kiln at Mid Wales Art Centre in Caersus. Caersus is an hour east of here.
Less than that, I hope, isn't it?
Oh, it depends whether you go on the train. Anyway, it's a bit east of here. And so Jean's going to talk to us about the kiln and the kiln. So please welcome Jean.
Thank you. Thanks. I've been potting for quite a long time. I lived in France for a while and built a wood-fired salt kiln there, and came back to England, didn't have the space to build my own kiln. So I got involved at Oxford with the Amagama project there at Whiteton Woods, and a few times I fired, and I began to get really upset at the amount of wood that just gets thrown into the kiln, and it's just unending, 3-day firing. So I started to research. I was also an MA student at Cardiff Metropolitan, and so I had the opportunity there to sort of research, and they gave me a bursary because I found out about this kiln, in France, designed by Jean Jirel, who's a French potter. He's built many kilns, and this is like the culmination of it, and he's in his mid-70s now, so he wanted one that was easy to fire, and he was also very concerned. In France, they're very much more environmentally aware than we are here, I think, and he'd had feedback from people saying, how on earth can you be wood firing when we have this climate crisis going on? And so he designed this kiln, which uses about 1/3 of the wood for a normal kiln that size. It's also super insulated, so it fires a bit quicker, and it's ergonomic. So the 3 E's are ergonomic, economic, and environmentally friendly. So if we go on with that, I went on a course. I couldn't come to this conference 2 years ago because I was in France learning about the kiln, and I came back and had the opportunity at Mid Wales Arts to build one. They had a wood kiln there which was not reaching temperature and was using too much wood. They couldn't get enough heat in it, so I took that down. We reused most of the materials from that. The kiln is, as you see, got a metal frame which I had made at a local welder's. There are all the plans for the kilns that Jirel has designed are available free online. I'll give you the contacts for that later. And it was mostly me and Alison Finiston in the middle, sort of reading the French instructions, working out what to do, and then doing a bit of building. We have now got English instructions written by Peter Rook, who always translated the French ones, so it's not quite such an effort. I had a couple of volunteer days for people to come and help, and Tim in the audience here was one of the people who came along to help. So this is the Jirel kiln, and the things that are sort of innovative about it. First of all, the bit on the back, I don't know if I can do this with the thingy. So the firebox is here on the back, the door is around the other side, so it's got a big closing door, so you don't have to build a wicket each time, which makes it shut firmly, and so that's keeping the heat in. The firebox is vertical. I'll show you some more pictures later. So it's got a slot in the top, and so you're feeding it vertically. So it's cutting down on all that bending and opening the door that you have to do with most wood kilns. So it's much easier. I've shown, so there's I made a couple of changes from the original French plans. You can see there's 3 dampers in the top of the chimney. So the chimney is the whole width of the kiln and integral with the kiln. I don't know if I'll show you more diagrams of that later. The original one had one long damper, which I thought with a kiln shelf over 1 metre long was going to be a bit fragile, and I couldn't stand the thought of all that expense of replacing them every time it cracked. So I divided it into 3, which works fine. And the slot below that is a Venturi system. It's something that's used mostly in chemistry and physics, I think. It's just a slot in the back of the chimney. Usually it has bungs in it, as you see in the big picture. But when you're reducing, that is a system which helps to cut down the smoke. So as soon as you see any smoke coming, you open up a bit of the venturi and it causes a secondary combustion inside the chimney, which is still at the back of the chamber. So any of that extra secondary combustion goes back and as heat into the kiln. So it's cutting down, and also it makes very little smoke. I mean, it is quite a good kiln for that, but it means that you can't actually tell easily when it's in reduction. I think I need to get some sort of monitor so that we can read it electronically. And you can see it's got a very high chimney as well, which also makes it reduce very easily. Right, sorry, next one. So it uses Littlewoods, as I said. So I've only checked it once. It's a 620 litre chamber. So that's 2 stacks of 50 by 50 centimetre shelves side by side, and it's about 1.10 m tall. So it's easy to stack. You haven't got to lean right through to the back of the kiln. And so that was a bit less than the wood that we used. The one time I checked it, we used 325 kilos of mostly softwood. That's the view of the door from the top. So you can see it's on a hinge and just slides into place and then bolts shut. It has ceramic fibre around the outside to make a seal. And that's the chamber inside. So you can see the holes. So instead of having one single flue, it's got several little ones which go into the chimney, which is the entire width of the kiln. The flame path you can see, so the vertical firebox is the other side. The flames come through where those corbels are on the first picture. This is with the floor in place, so they come up under the floor. It has a couple of strange arrangements. I think there could be some more. Hang on, I should go forward and show you that. Yes, so I'll go back to the others. So in packing, it hasn't got a bag wall, so you put up a couple of kiln shells there to deflect the flames up, and then they come back down, which I think there could be some further arrangements with that. But otherwise, no. So that's the chamber. So this is the top of the firebox, called the piano. Jarell called it, and you can see it's got alumina bricks which you can move in and out, and they make the hole that you then post your wood into. It usually works well, but it's very dependent on the weather. So I fired it about 7 times now. We want a nice little bit of breeze, and that's perfect. It sucks all the flame into the kiln. But if there's very high pressure, so there's not too much draw, you do get a bit of flame coming out of the top of the firebox. Not enough to make it dangerous, and I'll show you that in the next picture. So there you can see using the piano, and there's some wood in there. Actually, that's quite good. The flame's all going into the kiln at that point. But it's also very high. We have to use steps to close the damper and open it. So I think I'm going to think about a way of changing that as well. And this is showing the door. So the door's bolted in place. And that's great because it's so quick. So I've been doing sort of 3-day weekends. People come on a Friday to glaze and pack. We fire on the Saturday. Firings have been 14 hours. I think we've had 12, but we've got about 3 hours of reduction within that. And the results have been getting better as we've used it more. It's like the kiln's getting seasoned now. So that's, and you can see set of cones, that's 8, 9, 10, fairly even throughout. And that was the first firing that we did. And you see it wasn't terribly densely packed. I had no faith that it was actually going to work, but it did. It was fine. And we've not had any major problems. But I also, there's some more. So this was all of that work. So that's all that was in that very first kiln. Reasonable reduction, but really I was looking at that stage for it to be an alternative to gas firing. So when I started doing my MA, it was when the Russians went into Ukraine, and it seemed really immoral to be using gas at that point. And also the gas prices went through the roof, but it was really looking for an alternative to gas. But as we've gone on, we're getting much, much better, more flashing, we're getting ashing through the kiln now. I think it's just performing like quite a nice proper wood kiln, and still with 14 hours is the most that we've taken. And it's important, and we were talking about ceramics just as, how am I doing on time? Oh, just over, very quickly, sorry. We've been talking about ceramics in a very unemotional way, but in fact there's a real response that you get to wood-fired ceramics, and that's really important to me to be able to offer that as a sort of an environmentally friendly way of getting wood firing done. So I think that's about it. I'll take questions later. There's my crew from Cardiff helping with that, and I also wanted to put this up. So, sorry, just very quickly. As I said, all of the plans, there are 3 different size kilns, 1 professional version and 3 self-builds. They're all available from that Herman Jurel wixsite.com. It's maintained by a really enthusiastic team that works with Jean Jurel to make the first few kilns. And they're very keen to share any information, so do log on to that. And if anybody wants any other information, do contact me. I've also got a PDF that I'm happy to share with anybody of building my kiln. So if anyone's going to do it, I'm happy to share that.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean. It was really lovely to see a kiln being made and the processes and the results, the wonderful results that you're getting from it now. So thank you for sharing that.
Nice people, good pots.
Yeah. That's great. Okay, so we just got to one last switch over. Our next speaker will be Lucy Worry. Lucy is a ceramicist, and she's the founder member of AGNES. AGNES is the Artists Global Network for Environmental Sustainability. So I'll let Lucy explain what that is, and welcome, Lucy.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This isn't a slight on all my other fellow speakers, but this is maybe what your brain might be looking like right now. And that's what my brain looked like about a year into my ceramics degree. It can be incredibly overwhelming. But let's rewind a little bit. When I was 14, I was hugely inspired by the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. And that summit was hugely impactful on me, and it really sparked something in me. I decided there and then, watching probably Newsround or something like that, maybe not when I was 14, but it made me want to save the world. And I decided I would do that by becoming an environmental consultant. And I'm not even sure how I worked out at 14, pre-internet, what that even was, but I did somehow. And I even did some research on degrees that I needed to get to be able to do that. So I went on to do a biology degree, and then I did a master's in international environmental law. And then one of my first jobs was working for the UK's largest environmental consultancy company in the UK. So far, so good. But gradually, I realised that the work that I was doing was mainly ticking boxes. The focus wasn't so much on creating real behavioural change or protecting the environment. It was more about billable hours and profits. Putting that into perspective, though, obviously not everything that I did was in a bad way. I'm proud of some of the work that I was involved in. And one project that was incredibly relevant to AGNES was a project I worked on with all the communication departments of the environmental departments in EU countries, sharing best practice on their communication policy and what campaigns worked and what didn't. And they all were very open in sharing that information, which just seemed like a bit of a no-brainer instead of reinventing the wheel every time. Anyway, overall, my career was better than being a banker, for example, but it wasn't satisfying enough for me. So back to ceramics. I didn't actually touch a lump of clay until I was about 35. And the only reason I did that was because I was taking my kids to a ceramics workshop after school. And I ended up getting completely hooked and sort of dragging them along each week rather than them wanting to go. But it wasn't until the first lockdown that I had a slight rush of blood to the head and decided to do a ceramics degree at Carmarthen School of Art. And I absolutely loved it. And for that year, I didn't really give that much thought to the environment. My husband's always telling me to have a day off because I bang on about it the whole time. But I kind of had a year off and was having so much fun and didn't really think about it. However, gradually, once we got into making more conceptual projects, everything I did seemed to come back to the environment. An example of one of the pieces I made about 18 months ago was a piece called Supply Chain. And this came about because I was doing some research on glazing and asking whether environmental art actually can create behavioural change, or does somebody go to an environmental art exhibition about climate change and then a few hours later go home and whack their central heating up a few degrees. So this piece came out of some research I was doing on glazing, in particular cobalt. And I think Wendy touched on some of the issues associated with using cobalt. And I found Sarah Howard's book as well, which was the main inspiration for it. And whilst this piece was made from entirely reclaimed clay and reclaimed copper, I still felt slightly hypocritical advocating for an environmental issue, but not really being especially mindful of the materials that I was using. So I tried to research sustainable ceramics practices, and there was information out there, and I've just been sitting listening to all of my fellow speakers, feeling very at home and kind of heard. And but that wasn't necessarily what I was finding 4 years ago. So it's great that things have come on and that we're here talking about it so openly now. So it was frustrating that it wasn't all in one neat, accessible place and easy to understand and implement. And I have to be careful here because my tutors are in the audience. But there was little about sustainability embedded into the course that I was doing. However, I must say that Carmarthen School of Art is excellent at reclaiming clay, and they've also been very supportive of me meddling in the way that we do things in the glaze room. So we now have 2 big baths of water that everybody uses to rinse their glaze making equipment in, so that we're stopping all that material going down the drain. And it's actually quite shocking how much material is in at the bottom of those baths after a few months. And that was actually something that I saw that Oregon University were doing. And they were so open when I contacted them to ask them more about their process, and they actually go on to use that waste glaze to make paving slabs to use around the university. I haven't quite got there yet with what we're going to do with our waste glaze, but it's on my list of things to do. But that started me thinking about how they were so open with sharing information. And then fortuitously around that time, I met someone called Kevin Price, who was the ex-COO of BAFTA. And Kevin was instrumental in bringing the Albert scheme into BAFTA. And for those of you who don't know, Albert is the industry standard for sustainability in television production. So most people don't bother watching the end of the credits anymore because we're already on to the next thing. But there's now all UK TV that's broadcast has to go through the Albert Sustainability accreditation. So there's an emblem on the bottom of the credits. So he had experience in setting that up. And together we started asking why there wasn't something like that for the visual arts. And that's how Agnes was born, the Artist Global Network for Environmental Sustainability, also named after one of my hero artists, Agnes Deans. So our vision, to create a consortium that helps artists reduce their environmental impact and use their work to communicate a more sustainable future. Agnes exists to be a catalyst, a support system and an advocate, and we want to help artists and institutions adopt greener practices, form new collaborations and amplify the voices of artists creating work that sparks environmental awareness and behaviour change. The digital resource hub that we'll create will eventually become home to best practice guidance for all art disciplines, so not just ceramics. We want to be as broad as possible, sculpture, digital art, photography and more. And we want to be as inclusive and far-reaching as possible. And we want to plant the seeds of Agnes within the university system and art college system. So these are a few of the universities that we've been talking to. And in part, Albert, that I mentioned earlier, was a success because it was housed in an infrastructure that already existed. So that's why we thought that basing Agnes in the higher education system was a good idea, where we can reach thousands of students and embed sustainability from the first day of their course. And this is significant because they're going to be the artists and designers of the future. We've spoken with more than 45 universities and colleges, and there's been an overwhelming positive response to Agnes. And we plan to fund the organisation from subscription fees from universities matched with 50% grant funding. And of course, we all know that arts funding is being decimated at the moment, and universities don't have a lot of spare cash, but some actually are really going down the back of the sofa and finding pots of money. So it's very encouraging. So we've already got our first members signed up, and they will have a seat on our advisory board. So what will we do? Our first major step is to do a pilot project, and we're hoping to launch that in the next few weeks. We're going to map out what sustainability and climate literacy resources already exist in UK art institutions, and more broadly identify where the gaps are. This means working closely with 6 colleges and universities, consulting with industry partners and figuring out the best ways to share this knowledge across the Agnes network. We've made a point of trying to include industry partners, so we've been talking to paint manufacturers and art suppliers like Jackson's Art, because we want to not just say, oh, you shouldn't be using that. We want to then try and work with industry to try and find products that are environmentally sustainable. So we're going to gather insights from institutions at all levels, so management, tutors, technicians and students. We'll explore awareness and attitudes, practices and behaviours, and barriers and motivations. Part of the job will be actually getting students on board, so not then just talking to audiences as artists, but from within. Understand sustainability plans within those art departments in the universities. But also, if sustainability is embedded in the courses they offer, then how are they doing that, and is it working? There are some university departments that we've spoken to who are already really forward thinking and are embedding sustainability not just in art but across all courses across the whole university. But then there are others who aren't so far ahead. So the idea is that we share all of that knowledge around and bring everyone up to the same level. We will gain a broad picture of materials and processes used, waste produced and energy used, identify further research needs and co-design a framework for sharing best practice. This will form the beginning of the digital resource hub, and that will form a large part of how Agnes can support artists. And then we'll launch a trial of the resource hub tailored to different art disciplines. We can't, with the funds that we've got, we can't look at all disciplines to begin with. So obviously I've picked out ceramics, but we're looking at fine art and sculpture to begin with. So beyond the pilot project, our hope is that artists and makers of the future become armed with the skills and values embedded values to embed sustainability at the heart of their practice. And eventually we see Agnes offering free online and in-person training, hosting events at art colleges across the UK to share resources and hold workshops. We also want to create physical hubs so we've got York, St John's and Leeds and various others in the north who are interested. We'd like a Welsh hub as well. and so that they can, a lot of feedback we've had is that universities are very inward looking, and that more some of the people we've spoken to want to make links with other universities to share experience. We want to host exhibitions, competitions and residencies to raise the profile of sustainability in art and empowering artists to lead meaningful environmental change. And ultimately, we hope to open all these resources and opportunities up to all artists and makers, not just those who are students in higher education, so that we create an artist movement where collaboration and positive action for the environment become the norm. Kevin and I share a great belief that artists can be instrumental, if not leaders, in environmental change. And I was thinking about this presentation and what traits ceramicists or potters or clay artists, whatever you want to call yourselves, have that support this belief. And this is what I came up with. So, to work with clay, you have to be resilient because things don't always go to plan. You need to be curious and creative, always exploring and always learning. You need patience, whether it's waiting for the kiln or mastering a new form. You have to love a transformation, turning earth into something enduring and meaningful. You need to be a little bit stubborn and quite a lot determined, I think, because clay can test you, and so can the process of making. And of course, you need to stay hopeful that what emerges from the kiln reflects your vision. And what struck me was that these are exactly the same traits that we need to tackle environmental challenges. The same resilience, curiosity, creativity and hope will help us to build a more sustainable future through our art and beyond it. So if you'd like to find out more, then we have a website and an Instagram account, or you can get in touch with me directly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That's really wonderful and inspiring talk to finish our actual presentations. It's a very positive, and I have to apologise, we've gone on longer, but everyone was so good. I didn't really want to cut anyone off in mid-flow. But now we've got some time, a little bit of time for questions and a bit of discussion. So I'll invite all the presenters to come a bit more onto the screen, and actually we can take questions for the online presenters too. So there should be a roving mic out there. So if anyone would like to ask questions, yeah. Already there's one here. Why don't we just, while this is being set up, would you like to come down to this? Yeah, speak well into the microphone so we pick it up.
This is for Lucy, really. Have you contacted anyone at Cardiff Met? Because at the moment we have an EDGE plan that's rolled out across every single subject in the arts school, which stands for Ethical, Digital, Global and Entrepreneurial. And in ceramics, we just blast it because, as you can imagine, we've already cultivated that more philosophical sensibility in our synergistic, God, this is not words, relationship with the earth anyway. And so the ethical employment of materials and the processing of clay is becoming very much a systemic part of the student experience. It's really beautiful, so it might be really good to talk.
Yeah, definitely. We've been really, is that working?
Yeah.
So we've been really well supported by CHIEF, the Council for Higher Education, in arts and design. And so we got in contact with all CHIEF members, and I think Cardiff Met is a CHIEF member. So I did send an email to somebody, I can't remember who it was, so I can't.
I'll get back to you on that.
But yes, if afterwards I'm going to hang around, so that would be, yeah, it would be great. Thank you.
So we have online, sorry, there's another question here. Can we go to this gentleman here?
If I can squeeze two in, be greedy. One for Jean with wood firing. If we look at the regulations that have been implemented recently on wood burning stoves and so on, to cut the emissions, that's had a significant effect. But sooner or later, somebody will look at the smoke coming out of an old wood firing design in reduction and say, hey, we've got to do something about that. I think for wood firing it's very important that we do some actual measurements and start thinking about that before the bureaucrats go and put something totally unrealistic in place.
Well, that was why it's the that was why the kiln was designed in the first place, because Giraud was aware of.
Yeah, but there's no actual physical measurements. We can't say there's so many.
I did have somebody who was going to get me in touch with somebody at Cardiff University who deals with environmental pollution. So that is an intention. Yeah. Yeah.
Gina and I first met at Wycombe at Oxford University, and I kept banging on at them because they've obviously got resources, but they had zero interest in it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, they wouldn't want to check their kilns, I don't think.
Exactly, I think they might have found it embarrassing.
Yeah, but yes, I'm very interested, and I think it's quite important. And also, I need to keep a better record of the amount of wood that we're using.
And for Jodie, we talked a bit after you'd done your report on your plans for getting a database of firing. That's actually possible because most of the controllers log the data, and for example, prior to Brexit, I was working on a citizen science crowdsourcing project for an EU research project, and we had something similar to Glazy where people could upload data. I mean, it was nothing to do with ceramics, but it would be very possible and good to do that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Like in the back of my report, in one of the annexes, there's a specification for the stuff that you need to be recording if you don't have a digitally enabled controller, smart controller. There are lots of smart controllers on the market now, and they will give you that data, and you can download it to your computer if you're interested. The thing that I found was a bigger barrier to that in our community is that when you're making pots, and you have very little time to kind of, be scientific about what you're actually doing. And so one of the people I was talking to in Japan, he's a lecturer at a university, the kind of next phase of one of the recommendations of a next project, because all of this is about asking good questions and expanding the research field, and there is a massive potential there for some academic or university student who wants to look at this to take that forward and essentially develop a kind of Glazy but for firing and data from kiln firing.
Well, it needn't be academia. I mean, Glazy's not academia.
Yeah. Citizen
science.
And
everybody here, if you're interested in contributing to that, give me a shout while I'm here. I wouldn't dash off after today, but maybe all weekend, or dig me out online and drop me an email.
Have we got any online questions? Anything that particularly you want to highlight? Okay, that's all right. There's a lady. Oh, there's a lady here in the front row.
Is clay?
Oh, can you wait a minute? Can you do it into the microphone so that everyone could hear, please?
Is clay unlimited resource? I.e., will we run out by digging it out of the ground? So should we start thinking about is making decorative installations and in the future, will that be a waste of pottery? Will it have to be just so we can eat out of it if there's any of us left?
That's a good question. Thank you very much. I mean, clay, generally, we as potters only use like tiny bit of percentage, so it won't be the potters who will dig up all the clay in the world. However, there are particular grades of clay that are being exhausted and are not available at the market anymore.
I think, Wendy, do you want to say something?
I think I just want to add into what Julia's saying and say that a lot of clays are very, very old. They've taken up to 2 million years to mature and develop. And I think as such deserve a huge amount of respect. And I think we see it as a commodity that has kind of just been sanitized. It comes in a packet and is easily available 24/7 anywhere in the world. But it isn't just that. It's something that's far, far, far more ancient and deserves so much more respect. So I'm going to, kind of put it that way. But it's not going to run out. But as Julia said, in certain places, certain clay varieties have already run out. I can think of quite a couple in different countries that I've worked in. I also just wanted to sort of cycle back and go to the wood firing question. Once again, you mentioned the question of air pollution is really significant there, because in most East Asian countries, Japan, Singapore, and China, because of the high levels of air pollution, wood firing only happens in very, very, very rare and very rural spaces because it is outlawed. And because of that, certainly in Japan, there's a huge collector market for wood-fired pottery because it's so, so rare. We are not at those same levels of particulate matter in our air, but it is something that we do need to be mindful of.
Okay, thank you very much, Wendy. And actually, I just see Victor's got his hand up. So can I bring Victor in now? Can you unmute Victor and just join us now?
Yeah, my internet is breaking a bit, so just...
we can hear you well. Thank you.
Just to add to that, in London, for example, the clay that's being dug from construction sites is about 30 million years old. So it's going to take a while until that clay is formed again. But like on the other side, there is enough clay coming out of the ground every year in London that in just 1 year, if we've recycled all of that clay, would have enough for all of our lifetimes, for all the pottery in the UK. So it's there.
Julia would like to
I
add
would
in.
just really want to add a little extra consideration about the finite nature of clay, is that sometimes it can become unavailable, not because there is an end to a particular mine, but for example, in Ukraine, most of the clay reserves are in the eastern part, which are now at the front line, meaning like all the potters of the country and many potters in Europe as well, because Ukrainian clay gets exported and is part of many of the ceramic bodies that people are using in Europe, is just unavailable. And I just heard before coming here 3 days ago that one of the companies that produces terracotta earthenware clay in Ukraine closes down for good because of the military action, like coming close to the site. Meaning that the more recycled content we can get in our clay bodies and the more local it is, the more we kind of resilient and sustainable in terms of being able to keep using the clay for tableware or for decorative sculptures.
How easy is it for a lay potter to dig their own clay and refine it? Is it a doable? I've never done it.
It is. It's just a little back breaking sometimes.
And there's lots of resources for that. There's a lot of publications and lots on social media and websites.
If any of you are interested in how difficult it is, there's a really lovely set of films on YouTube featuring Isaac Button, who was one of the last potters working in Yorkshire. It was one man, and he was digging the clay, he was making glaze from the clay in the field next door, and then firing a coal-fired bottle kiln. And it's really inspiring, but very hard work. So,
can I say one from, this is from a distance. Everyone is focused on reducing our carbon footprint, which is important, but I think we also need to acknowledge as potters that is a highly extractivist discipline that degrades ecosystems. Do the speakers know of anyone who is focused on aspects of our environmental impact?
There's a potter I met on Dartmoor who was very, very concerned about the extractive nature of what we're doing. She's done a master's thesis on this, and I can't remember her name, but I will find out and let you know. But she talked about how, you know, she's digging up clay on Dartmoor and materials on Dartmoor and not telling anyone where they're from because she's worried about other people going to do the same thing and the ecological impact of doing that. And the guy I talked to in America, David Peters, he was saying, you know, he did that for many years. He sourced his own materials, dug his own clay. It's back-breaking work. Like I think anyone who's tried that will know. And he was basically saying the answer isn't for every potter to go and do that. And it's a really fashionable thing at the minute to go and like find wild clay, right? It's a big conversation that lots of us are having. And it's a really fun thing to do because it really helps you understand how precious the materials are and how much work it takes to process those materials and make a thing. But actually there is an argument counter to that, which is that when you have an industrial process, actually industry is very good at becoming super efficient about processing materials, and that economy of scale that you get with that can sometimes be less impactful than everyone trying to do their own thing in isolation. So that's a really interesting debate, and I met a few people who were having that debate, so they're referenced in the report.
Wendy, come in now if you want to say something.
Yeah, I think, Maura, that's really what I was trying to say politely in my presentation, because it's very difficult to be a part of this community and say difficult things, and because it's people's livelihoods and they've invested so much time and energy into developing practices. But yes, it is fundamentally extractivist. There are a lot of writing about this. I mean, I'll be happy to send you a bibliography around critical thinkers in the space. Mostly it's not coming out of ceramics itself, it's coming more broadly out of art theory. And mining is really fantastic.
Yeah.
Lucy Lepard's book.
Oh, yeah. I think just make it clear it's not my question.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly add that in terms of ecosystem preservation, there is a field in ceramic arts that is about the renewal and regeneration of ecosystems. Like people who specifically, for example, work with artificial clay habitats for endangered species or coral reefs, or managing their plot of land in a way that it absorbs carbon, where they work in ceramics. So there are ways to not only take from the ecosystem, but also to bring back.
Yeah, regenerative practices are a huge emerging field where people are looking at making a net positive impact on the environment, and not just sort of a take waste and make a linear model.
Oh, there's the question right at the back.
I have these ladies here.
Okay, these ladies, okay.
Thank you very much. Shall I ask for this?
Sorry, mine relates to what you've just been saying about clay. So we're not academic, we just kind of make pots in Manchester. When we buy our clay, we tend to go to Stoke. How do we know that the clay we're buying is, you know, has been extracted in an ethical way, sustainable way? How do we know where the clay has come from? I just assumed it was from Stoke. It was kind of from hot clays, it came from the ground.
The answer to that is you don't, unless you've done the work to like actually understand where that clay has come from. Like I wrote to every company in the UK producing clay and asked them for their, this isn't on, is it? Asked them for their sustainability plan, and none of them had one. And hot clays were the only one who actually even responded to that question. And it's likely, you know, Staffordshire stoneware, for example, is probably mined in Staffordshire. You know, we have some of the best clay seams in Devon, but we can't access that clay because it all goes to industry. So you have to do the work is the answer to that question. You don't. If we all keep asking, yeah, that's a fundamental thing. Like we buy this stuff, but we are a tiny proportion of the market. And so we have very little market force as a collective, but we have a powerful market force in terms of our voice because there's lots of us.
Can I just ask two very quick questions?
Did anyone want to add something quickly?
Yeah,
let Lucy just speak.
when I was doing my research on cobalt, I contacted as well lots of suppliers, and on the phone they can be quite kind of, oh yeah, no, we'll send us what you want, and then just absolutely nothing. And I'm the person who's tied themselves in knots to the point where I haven't fired anything since I made that supply chain thing, which was about 18 months ago, and I haven't glazed anything for about 2 years. And I've started making, actually Victor gave me, I went to see Victor, he gave me some of the waste clay, and then I got some waste hops fines. I steamed them, chopped them up, and have made my own cob. So it is really hard though, but it is worth keeping asking, and I hope that when Agnes gets going, that's the kind of thing that we can put money into researching. And there's something that I want to introduce into the glaze room at Carmarthen is a traffic light system, so that when you take all your ingredients down before you start weighing out, this is obviously if you make your own glazes, but we come up with a system that, you know, if it's red, it's highly likely it's been mined in an unethical way, it's destroying the environment. I mean, I've been really pleased actually that everyone's been quite bold about what they're saying. My presentation was probably a lot more reserved than I am, because I would go as far to say there's no need for any more blue ceramics. If you read into where cobalt comes from, you know, pregnant women with 40 times the amount of cobalt in their blood that they should have. It's absolutely sort of extraordinary that goes on. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. I'm just saying I feel your pain. It is difficult, but we do just need to keep, as Wendy said, keep talking about these difficult things.
So yeah, Wendy wants to say something now.
Yeah, in terms of best professional practices, we're busy collaborating with the Rijks Academy in Amsterdam. They've got a fantastic tech fellowship program where every year they get in a batch of about 4 new tech fellows. The aim is to, they're in Netherlands, they realized that technical skills are not valued, and technicians in art studios, community studios, residencies have incredible knowledge that is not valued, and they're not paid for it, one. And so it's about, that's kind of the backstory. But the front story is the tech fellows are there to do, firstly, an inventory of what's in the studios, and secondly, once the inventory is done, get rid of anything that's toxic, anything that is endangered, or anything that is, questionable. Looking at those provenances and looking at the chemical composition. And that means they've got rid of cobalt, they've got rid of arsenic, they've got rid of barium, they've got rid of cadmium, they've got rid of pretty much like a lot of basic standard materials in their workshop. The result is they can't make a lot of colors, and so they've embarked on a research journey. They're now on their third tech fellow into making new colors, looking at waste streams that are not extractive waste streams, and that do not compete with other, because sometimes waste streams have already got end destinations, but looking at waste streams that are available and are not being competed for within local economies. And one of those, for example, is, and I don't actually know the proper English term, because I speak about this in Dutch all the time, but it's recycled asbestos. Everybody takes asbestos out of their houses, it goes to asbestos treatment centers, and then you've got this product afterwards, and nobody knows what to do with this reworked and treated asbestos. It's a fantastic grog, it's fantastic material within a clay body, it's super light, it's not toxic, it can no longer harm people, and within a glaze it creates fantastic colors, including wonderful mauve. So the field is in motion, and it just takes courage, and it takes, research. So these tech fellows are in numbers of different workshops. And another workshop where there's really interesting results is the photography workshop, where they obviously got rid of a lot of all the horrible, nasty chemicals. And one of the artists there is working with blueberry juice as a fixer. And it works fantastically. One doesn't need these awful chemicals. The question there that they need to ask, or that they're asking, is how long will blueberry juice fix photographs for? Will the image still be there in 200 years? But this is the same question we ask, and I ask of ceramics. Does it need to be fired? The stuff that I showed has been around for 30,000 years. It does not need to be fired to be here for 20,000 years. It does not need to be fired. If it's beautiful and valued, people will look after it, and it doesn't need to be fired. And that's where the environmental impact is.
Thank you, Wendy. No, we're a bit running out of time, but I just want to bring that's perfect. It's so wonderful what you're saying, but I'm really sad we're running out of time. But Victor would like to make a comment, so I'd like to bring Victor in for the last time. Victor, would you like to say what you'd like to say? Oh, his screen's frozen.
I think we need to stop.
Okay, Victor, I think you're unfortunately frozen, so I'm not sure you can make a comment now. So I think, unfortunately, we have to stop now because there is actually a film coming to the Arts Centre very soon. Will be shown here in this venue. So what I'd like to do is thank everyone for coming, but most of all, thank all our wonderful presenters. I think it's been the most amazing.